Good evening, everybody. We'll just wait for a second or two to let everybody switch their cameras on, and then I'll introduce our speaker this evening. You can see the numbers are shooting up, which is great. No finer way of spending a cold December evening than with the Sainsbury Institute, of course. We'll just give it a minute or two, Alfred, if that's okay with you. Okay, well, I can see that friends are still joining us from all corners, but I think it's past 6 o'clock now here in Norwich, and so we will make a start on this very special December pre-Christmas third Thursday online lecture from the Sainsbury Institute for the Study of Japanese Arts and Cultures. A very warm welcome to all of you, wherever you are. We've had a beautiful sunny day here in Norwich today. As I said earlier, it's a little chilly now. Of course, here in the UK, everybody is very concerned about the new Omicron variant of COVID-19, and I'm afraid it's largely that variant and its appearance that means that we're not able to welcome our speaker this evening in person to Norwich, but instead we've had to revert to our online format, which of course has served us so well throughout this pandemic to date. I hope that you're all well, and of course I hope that the situation doesn't deteriorate too badly here over the next few weeks. So back in September, seems like a long time ago now, I had the very great pleasure of attending one of the first in-person events in about a year and a half. And it was the opening of an amazing exhibition at the British Museum in London. It was a great opportunity to enjoy some really fantastic art and, of course, to reconnect with so many friends and colleagues from the Japanese art world. The curator of that exhibition is our special guest speaker this evening, Dr. Alfred Haft. Alfred is the JTI project curator for Japanese collections at the British Museum, and his research focuses on Japanese prints and print culture. His many wonderful publications, and I would advise you all to Google Alfred and see what he's been writing over the years, include Aesthetic Strategies of the Floating World, Mitate, Yatsushi, and Furyu in Early Modern Japanese Popular Culture, and Cultural Migration in Edo, Japan, the case of Hokusai and Obuse, which is going to be coming out very shortly. Now, it's a tremendous pleasure to welcome Alfred to our third Thursday. Thank you for giving up time to do this for us. We will find an opportunity to get you back up to Norwich in the flesh just as soon as we're able to do so. But I think without any further ado, I'm going to hand you over in just a second. Having said without any further ado, I do, just because we're back on our online format, I would like to draw our audience's attention to the bottom right-hand part of your screen, and you'll see that there's something that says Q&A. While Alfred is speaking, please do feel free to use that function to drop your questions in there, and we'll see how many of the questions we can get through at the end of the evening. But now, turning to our speaker, Dr. Alfred Haft, welcome, and we're very much looking forward to hearing from you about Hokusai's illustrations for the great picture book of everything.
Thank you very much, Simon, for that very generous and warm introduction, and thank you all for joining this evening from wherever you are located. I feel very lucky to be able to be joining you, broadcasting from central London and indeed from the British Museum. So I'm going to share my screen now. And And let's see. Slideshow.
I think, Alfred, you want the one which is it's that little TV thing that looks like a TV screen at the top in the orange bar. If you go over to the left, keep going left.
Sorry, Alfred, if you click resume slideshow, that should continue from where we left off earlier.
Where is resume slideshow?
It's on next to Hokusai, the title. Yeah, there we go.
I think that looks like a slideshow now to you, I think.
Yes, all looking good here.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you all for your patience there. You know, we are the British Museum, and technology is new to us. It's new to me anyway. So tonight I will just give you a brief overview of the British Museum's recent acquisition of Hokusai's hand-brushed illustrations for the Great Picture Book of Everything. In 2020, the British Museum acquired a group of 102 block-ready drawings that Katsushika Hokusai produced for an unpublished picture encyclopedia titled The Great Picture Book of Everything, Banmotsu, ehon, daizen. 2 drawings in the group bear the seal of Henri Weber, a French designer of Art Nouveau jewelry and Europe's leading collector of Japanese art in the early 20th century. In 1948, the drawings were evidently sold at a Paris auction and afterward remained in a private French collection, unknown apparently to anyone with a dedicated interest in Hokusai or Japanese art. Then in 2019, they emerged at another Paris auction where Israel Goldman purchased them before offering them to the British Museum and the nation. The museum's acquisition was funded by a bequest that Theresia Gerda Buch established in memory of her parents, Rudolf and Julie Buch, with support from Art Fund with a contribution from the Wolfson Foundation. And tonight in my presentation, I'd like to cover 4 topics. I'd like to introduce the Great Picture Book of Everything in 5 slides, a brief review of Hokusai's career, since that may be familiar to some, but not familiar to others, in 7 slides, show a selection of drawings from the Great Picture Book in 20 slides, and then finally, a brief introduction to something of the social environment of the Great Picture Book in Hokusai's day in 10 slides. So the drawings are housed in this purpose-made wooden storage box with a cover that slides into 2 grooves running along the 2 longer sides. Inscribed on the cover at left is the title of the book and Hokusai's name. Both the box and the underside of the cover are lined with marbled paper. A silk wrapper for the drawings fits into the box, and both the box and the wrapper were made probably during the late 1800s. As you see here, each drawing is brushed in ink on a thin sheet of paper around the size of a large postcard and pasted to a somewhat larger piece of heavy card. This is the frontispiece of the drawings, with an Indian Buddhist priest on the right and a Chinese boy on the left, introducing 2 of the main subjects covered in the drawings, India and China, Buddhist India and ancient China. And at the bottom left, you see the red seal of Henri Weber. And here is a partial view of the drawings laid out on a table, giving a sense of just how many there are. They are inscribed on the back in Arabic numerals 1 to 103, including a text page. But the numbering represents only their sequence within the box. It yields no sense of organization or how the drawings might have formed a picture encyclopedia. Working with Yasuhara Akio, formerly of Brown University, Tim Clark has established that the drawings cover 3 subject categories: Buddhist India, ancient China, and the natural world, and that in content, they form part of the same project as 3 volumes of block-ready drawings in the collection of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, published under the title Hokusai's Lost Manga. Hokusai specialist Asano Shugo of the Yamato Bunkakan Museum in Japan has confirmed that the British Museum's drawings are by Hokusai. Dr. Asano has also indicated that the British Museum's drawings probably date to the 1840s. The British Museum's and the MFA's drawings were intended for a book that, for unknown reasons, went unproduced. Precisely on that account, though, they escaped the block cutter's knife and survive for us to study and enjoy today. The British Museum's drawings represent a major rediscovery that adds to our understanding of Hokusai's life and work in his later years, a time when he was living with his artist daughter, Oi. And these are the people who were mainly involved in the recent research of the picture book of everything up to now. Tim Clark on the left, Asano Shugo is the first at the top, is the second at the top row. And then to the right is Roger Keyes, who is sort of the guiding spirit. He sadly passed away in the year 2020, but he's the guiding spirit of Hokusai research here at the British Museum and one of the great scholars of Japanese art overall, particularly prints and print culture. And then at the bottom row in the center, in the center there is Yasuhara Akio, who was retired, but took it into his head during the period of lockdown to work with Tim and scouring the internet for all kinds of information. And the internet is a fantastic resource. We learn nothing less. And at bottom right is Sarah Thompson of the of the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, who has worked with Tim in discussing the drawings there. And this is a new development at the British Museum, a digital research environment called Research Space, which is very flexible, allows for annotation of images of all kinds and collaborative discussion and scholarship, annotation of each area. So it is a fantastic research environment that is now under development for the study of these drawings. So just a little bit, and now my second topic, a little bit of Hokusai's career. Hokusai was born in the city of Edo, which is present-day Tokyo. At the age of 3, he was adopted into the household of a mirror polisher, and in his early teens became an apprentice to a block cutter, one of the key artisans in the woodblock printing process that dominated publishing during the Edo period, which is 1615 to 1868. In 1777, at the age of 19, he entered the studio of Katsukawa Shunsho, a successful floating world artist who specialized in pictures of beautiful women and actors on the stage. The next year, Hokusai began designing his own actor prints, signed Shunro, or Son of Shunsho, an example you see on the left. He remained in Shunsho's studio until shortly after the master's death in 1793, at which time, for unknown reasons, he was expelled. Throughout this period, he also wrote and illustrated popular short fiction. Following his expulsion from Shunsho's studio, Hokusai lost his bearings as an artist for a while. Then, in the mid-1790s, he began connecting with poetry groups specializing in kyoka, a type of witty verse. Designing privately commissioned poetry prints, or surimano, and illustrated kyoka books soon became a mainstay of his work. At this time, he is said to have studied the art of the decorative Rimpa school, and from 1795, he used the artist name Sori. In 1798, he transferred that name to a student, a customary practice, and began using the name Hokusai Tokimasa, reflecting his faith in the benevolent Buddhist deity Myoken, whose realm is believed to be the North Star, called Hokushin in Japanese. Hokusai achieved popular success during the years 1800 to 1810. In painting performances at large temples, he demonstrated his mastery of the brush by producing enormous building-sized paintings, around 210 to 105 meters, of familiar subjects such as Bodhidharma, the founder of Chan or Zen Buddhism, and the lucky god Hote. He also delivered a painting performance before the shogun, Japan's military ruler. Hokusai's illustrations for serialized adventure stories by the novelist Kyokutei Bakin brought him even wider attention. Among the many acclaimed Bakin Hokusai collaborations was Strange Tales of the Bone Moon, featuring the warrior Minamoto no Tametomo. And you see a painting that Hokusai produced on commission from the publisher at the end, around in 1811, at the end of the long series of novels, celebrating the success of that fantastic series. Lots of gold paint, in background and a wonderful sense of the excitement that Hokusai's illustrations generated, with Tomitomo holding the bow that no one could draw and three demons on the island of Onigashima attempting with all of their might to draw the bow to no avail. Around 1810, Hokusai began to produce the drawing manuals that would win him fame across Japan and the world. The first of these, Basic Instruction in Sketching, appeared in 1812. That year, he also traveled west to Nagoya, where he met a group of painting enthusiasts led by the elite swordsman and samurai retainer Maki Bokusen. At Bokusen's home, Hokusai produced hundreds of quick sketches he called manga, or drawings off the top of my head. Amazed by their variety and skill, Bokusen and others compiled the drawings into a volume that became the first in the celebrated series Hokusai's Sketches, or Hokusai Manga. In 1819, Hokusai turned 60. Looking forward to another journey around the 60-year East Asian calendrical cycle, he devised the new art name Iitsu, meaning one again. A final burst of activity in designing surimono followed in the early 1820s, but then commissions seem to have dried up. Relatively little work by him is known from the mid to late 1820s. He also seems to have suffered personal difficulties, including the deaths of a daughter and his second wife, a wayward grandson saddling him with gambling debts, and a possible stroke. Toward the end of the decade, his daughter Oi left a failed marriage and returned to work with and look after her father. Hokusai's fortunes revived once more in the early 1830s when publishers began commissioning him to design landscape, bird and flower, and other commercial prints. Some of these nature subjects also appeared in his earlier illustrated books. Although he was already past 70, his passion for drawing constantly yielded new compositions and pictorial approaches. He famously wrote, "Maybe by the time I reach the age of 110, every dot and line will appear to have a life of its own." The achievements of this period include 36 views of Mount Fuji, of which the Great Wave, Under the Wave of Kanagawa is one from that series, 2 series conventionally called Large Flowers and Small Flowers, and many other innovative series. In Japan, Fuji is considered a sacred mountain associated with longevity. It may also have held personal significance for Hokusai, since he incorporated the mountain's distinctive outline into one of his later seals and devoted a 3-volume illustrated book to 100 views of Fuji. The art names Manji, everything, and Gakkyo Rojin, old man crazy to paint, both emerged around 1834, around these years. In the 1840s, his final decade, Hokusai focused increasingly on painting. This medium allowed him to refine his technique and discover new depths in themes and motifs that he had previously explored. Though he was unsteady on his feet, he remained hardy in spirit and left Edo for at least one extended stay with his loyal patron, the wealthy merchant Takai Kozan, in mountainous Nagano or north central Japan. Hokusai had already lived twice as long as most of his contemporaries, but had every intention of living and working much longer, as expressed in the talismanic seal Hyaku, 100, which he used on the paintings of his last 3 years, of which this is one canonical example. Hokusai's late work combines keen observation, technical perfection, and a deepened sense of spiritual connection with his subjects. He is, by any standard, one of the major artists of the late Edo period. Now, Hokusai famously loved to paint, and here is his version of a standard depiction of an ordinary artist at work, not in the studio, but at the home of what appears to be a wealthy, satisfied patron, an artist who is working with 2 brushes at once, and one can almost hear the click as he switches from one to another. But 2 brushes, of course, is not enough for Hokusai. Here he has depicted a calligrapher working with 5 brushes at once, 1 in each hand, 1 in each foot, and 1 in the mouth. And Hokusai returned to this motif again and again over the years, as though this is some kind of expression of his own passion for painting. So now I move into my third topic, selected drawings from the Great Picture Book of Everything. Hokusai not only developed his own techniques, but also mastered and reworked the classic brushwork of East Asian painting. This page from the 10 Bamboo Studio album of calligraphy and painting, originally published in China in 1633, shows the traditional nail-head rat-tail brushstroke, which, as the name suggests, starts with a wide mark and tapers to a point over a shorter or longer distance. Here, it serves to depict different types of plants. It was also standard for defining the outlines of clothing and texture in rocks and mountains. A repertoire of extended applications occurs in Hokusai's work, and I'll give 3 examples from the Great Picture Book. Several drawings in the Great Picture Book illustrate tales associated with mythical emperors. Here, Emperor Shun, in his youth, improvises 2 basket weave hats as a parachute to escape from a burning building. The nail-head brushstroke defines the basket weave, but the way it is applied, in mirrored rows of light and dark ink, also nicely suggests the weave's 3-dimensional character. In this drawing, related to Buddhist India, Hokusai shows a wooden figure of the Buddha exchanging a greeting with Sariputra, one of the Buddha's disciples. The sculpture is unfinished, and the nail-head brushstroke serves to suggest the rough-hewn surface of the wood. We find a similar idea in a drawing from the Museum of Fine Arts, where 2 sculptors rough out the lower half of a guardian figure, while a 3rd sculptor refines the details of the upper half. This 3rd example shows evil mountain spirits fleeing before exploding firecrackers. Rising from the lower margin of the drawing are a network of branching flames, and here Hokusai has used the nail-head brushstroke to define both the flames and the sparks leaping from them. The detail on the right shows the variety in their application, which gives this scene a sense of crackling immediacy. And we should also note the delicacy in the rendering of the demon's flowing hair, which I'll return to a little bit. Drawing consensus suggests that the drawings for the Great Picture Book were intended to be printed each from a single woodblock. Some are quite atmospheric, with layered ink tones and brush marks over gray tones. So how is all of this possible? And I'll just give a couple of examples from Hokusai's published work. This is a book of moral tales, famous Japanese and Chinese figures, who are exemplary for different reasons. This is an example of a daimyo from the early 1600s. His name is Furuta Daizen Taiyu, who acted as regent for his underage nephew, and under his guidance, the domain prospered, but he did not keep any of the riches for himself. He returned it all to the domain and eventually retired to Edo. So he's an example of a virtuous ruler. But what I would like to point out, and I think there's my cursor, I think you can see that the robe here is printed in black, but the lines here are in reserve in white. And they probably would have been in the original drawing, may have been indicated in dark ink over an ink wash ground, but the block cutter has adapted the drawing to the purposes of woodblock printing and has printed them and has carved them out of the block so that they appear printed in reserve. So that's one way to print them. In this example, this is an example of Hokusai's illustrations from the main figures of the famous Chinese warrior tale, The Water Margin, which he produced all of the illustrations for over the course of 90 plus volumes. This is the Taoist sort of priest, a Taoist priest, well, one of the heroes, one of the 108 heroes of the Water Margin, who developed magical powers, Taoist powers, and in this case, he is shown seated on a parapets of a castle and summoning, in this case, it should be a dragon, but in this case, it's a lion from thin air. But what I want to point out, though, is the way the outline here of the lion's chin is itself outlined by a white mark, which both defines the brush mark of the lion's chin and separates it from the atmospheric background. There is also, I think you can see, a sort of scumbled texture to the background, and that was probably achieved by intentionally roughening the surface of the wood, so you get a sense of an atmosphere and a cloud, and it probably was also intentionally roughened here at the lower left edge, so that you get a sense of the gradation. So those are two techniques which might have made it possible to produce something like this tremendously atmospheric drawing in which King Shrutasoma, this is one of the drawings from the India section of the Great Picture Book, he describes the evil nine-tailed fox spirit, and he's doing so by the wisdom of the Buddha, which is contained in this sutra, this sutra scroll. So there's three things I would like to just mention about this particular drawing. One is that it is conceivable to render even as richly atmospheric a drawing as this with a single woodblock, where dark lines on gray might have been rendered in white. As we see, these are some of the dark lines on gray might have been rendered in white in the final drawing, and this atmosphere might have been achieved by an abraded block. The second point that I would like to note here is that around 10 years earlier, Hokusai had depicted this same subject, but in that case, the king is wielding a giant axe as the fox flees. It's a very different conception. And we can see how Hokusai's approach to this subject, as well as other subjects, evolved or mellowed in his later years. And there is one other example in the drawings from the Great Picture Book, and a painting in the Freer, which shows a difference, which is one of his very last paintings, in which the thunder god is shown in a much mellowed form compared to earlier examples. The third point I would like to make about this drawing is there may be many ways of reading the image, but fundamentally, it seems to me, a very concise illustration of the idea that knowledge is power, as the king is, through the Buddha's wisdom, is able to see what others cannot see. This evil nine-tailed fox, which in this case seems to be in a pose of pouncing on something, but also seems to be fleeing at the same time from the pure wisdom of the Buddha. So I'll just leave it at that. If the Great Picture Book, if the drawings for the Great Picture Book had been produced, there are these sort of technical approaches that might have been possible, but Hokusai probably would have been watching the block cutters like a hawk. As we see, for example, here in a letter that he sent to the publisher Kobayashi Shinbei, Suzanbo, where he instructs how to cut the eyes and noses in his drawings for a volume of selected Tang poetry illustrated. The letter, this is actually a kind of appendix to the letter, and it's addressed to the block cutters, and he's instructing them, this is the way to do my eyes, this is the way to do my noses, do not do them this way, do not do them this way. Those are the style of the Utagawa school, which at the time, Utagawa may be familiar to you, Utagawa Hiroshige, Utagawa Kunisada, Utagawa Kuniyoshi. This is a rival school that Hokusai had nothing to do with. And he indicates in this appendix to the block cutters that he absolutely cannot stand their style, that it has, as far as he's concerned, has nothing to do with the way, the proper rules of painting and to do the eyes and noses his way. So what did he mean by that, and how did it work in practice? So here is one of the drawings from the Great Picture Book. It shows the agricultural deity Shen Nong and two disciples using herbs to prepare medicine. This is the way we recognize Shen Nong. Okay, so it's a very long inscription, which suggests that this subject may not have been familiar to those who would have been reading the Great Picture Book. But they probably would have at least recognized the deity by the two horns here and by the straw mat that he is sitting on. However, this is a rather unusual version of Shen Nong, who is normally rather a fearsome looking character with really straggly hair, reeds in his mouth, strange fangs, leaves for clothing. So this is quite a different conception. This is a more approachable conception, a more realistic and understandable conception. And it is also a scene of teaching, which I will come back to. This detail shows how the eyes are done without lids under them, just as Hokusai had instructed, and here as well, and here as well. And one finds this similarly throughout these drawings of the Great Picture Book. They give this approach to the eyes is very understated compared to the emphatic way of drawing with a lid under them, so that you have a sort of bulging, staring eye. This manner of representing the eyes gives the figures a quiet, contemplative, sort of inward expression. And as I mentioned, this is a scene of training youngsters to develop a skill. It's a kind of apprenticeship. And Shen Nong here seems to have the patience of a wise teacher, perhaps reflecting Hokusai's ideal of not only professional training, but also of instruction or education more broadly understood. Two other points are worth noting about this detail. One is the delicate handling of the hair, which is consistent with that of the demon, which we saw earlier, fleeing the firecrackers, and the square area, this sort of rectangle around Shen Nong's head, which indicates this is a pentimento, where Hokusai developed the design further, made an alteration of some kind, and then pasted this on as a correction. It didn't matter that this is part of the drawing because these are not presentation drawings. These were intended for the woodblock. Right. I seem to have skipped a slide in which I hope it's all right if I go back a little bit. I'm sorry to do this. I think I skipped this. And I did want to bring it in just in case there were those of you who were not quite familiar with how the woodblock printing process worked. A polished block of cherry wood is then laid down, the artist's drawing, which would be laid down in reverse on the block, and then the block cutter's chisel would remove all of the unmarked areas, resulting in the block that you see at the bottom right, which is, this is a modern wood block, but this just gives you a chance, I think, to see an actual wood block and the kind of detail, the very close detail in the waves and so on, that could be achieved. So that's why I've gone back to this. So this, I hope, gives you an idea of how sort of the challenges involved in producing something like this, and also in following Hokusai's instructions to produce eyes and noses properly. Okay. So now let me just briefly consider how the drawings of the Great Picture Book relate to other works by Hokusai and works by him in other collections. On the right is a preliminary sketch from Hokusai Soko Shu, an album of Hokusai sketches informally known as the Curtis album in the collection of the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris. The figure's robes, hairstyle, and jewelry suggests that this is an ancient Indian prince or king, and it turns out to be Virudaka, the Indian king who annihilated the Buddha's family and who, according to legend, was himself later destroyed by a bolt of lightning. Here he is being thrown backward off his feet as the lightning bolt strikes him square in the chest in a fantastic manga-like conception. On the left is one of the drawings for the Great Picture Book, a finished version of the same subject. It takes the preliminary drawing forward in detail and conception, as now the lightning flash radiates in 3 dimensions, toward the viewer, across the drawing, and through and behind the figure. All around, the rays vary in length and density, and they appear to fade or disperse at their far ends. This patiently achieved realism makes the scene compelling, convinces us that we are witnessing an instantaneous, explosive act of divine retribution. This drawing from the Great Picture Book on the left and the published version on the right is from a fictionalized account of the wars between the first Qin emperor and Liu Bang, the first emperor of China's Han dynasty. In this case, Liu Bang slays a giant white snake that had terrorized an area of northern China. This is one of a group of perhaps 20 rousing adventure stories illustrated in the China section of the drawings. Others appear in the India section. And this just shows that although the Great Picture Book was not published, in several cases, the conceptions, at least some of the designs, did see the light of day, as it were. And this is one example in published form. And here is one of the drawings from the Natural World section of the Great Picture Book of Everything, showing an assortment of aquatic birds. Again, this is a lively scene in which Hokusai presents the birds from different angles and moving in different directions. But note that this is also a structured composition, framing the duck in the lower middle of the drawing. I'll just take you through how it appears this drawing was put together in 4 parts. 1, 2, this large swan, this large goose, 3, and then 4. And then these gulls were added, and then finally this duck in the lower center, which seems to be the central focus of the composition. And here is a close-up detail. We should notice, I think, that there are no outlines here, only rhythmically applied brush marks, which nevertheless manage to convey the individual quality of the various types of feathers, a sense of the bird's rounded form as though modeled in 3 dimensions, and thanks to adept foreshortening, a sense that the bird is at this moment veering toward the viewer. I mentioned that the drawings for the Great Picture Book are only the size of a large postcard, meaning that this duck could nest comfortably in a soup spoon. I can no more than guess at the technical facility required to paint so accurately on such a compressed scale. And I think one can only wonder at the artistic spirit that gave this bird such an animated presence. The duck returns in a painting that figures in the canon of Hokusai's late paintings, which I showed. This is a detail from Ducks in Flowing Water, which I showed you earlier. And again, on the right, in Hokusai's last illustrated book, in which he shared 70+ years of accumulated knowledge of how to paint and draw. In each case, the bird is not copied, but rethought and further developed, showing how Hokusai kept reinventing his subjects through his last years. So now I'm moving toward my 4th topic. What was an encyclopedia? The topics covered, here we see an example, one of the first Japanese encyclopedia from 1666, which was based on earlier Chinese examples. In this case, in this case, the author is Nakamoto Tekisai, and his purpose was to introduce his children to the terms that appeared in the Confucian classics. So we here have the Chinese term, the Chinese pronunciation, variant terms, and the Japanese pronunciation, the Japanese term here. And in this case, we have a tiger and a leopard. And on the right is a 1789, a later edition of the same encyclopedia, but in this case, with descriptions across the top of each of these different animals, a tiger, a white tiger, and a leopard. And you can see that there's some development, but the poses are exactly the same, almost exactly the same, particularly for the tiger. Encyclopedias in this period covered a whole range of topics. As you may know, the universe and everything in it in Asia at this time is formed of three components: heaven, earth, and man. And encyclopedias covered those three topics: everything from cosmography and geography to dwellings, people, which means occupations, and people of other lands, the human body, clothing, rarities, all kinds of tools and implements, and animals, which ranges from land animals, birds, and sea creatures to insects. And there was a whole section on plants, the plant kingdom, grains, vegetables, fruit, trees, flowers, and also, in this case, of this example of 1789, a volume at the end, volume 10, of miscellaneous figure subjects from classical ink painting, Chinese scholars, Chinese poets, and so on. On the right, as I mentioned, we have now a physical description of each animal, but it doesn't give any sense of what the animal is like. What is their animal nature? The bamboo is also included here as part of the scenery, but it is conventional because tigers were always associated with bamboo. And the landscape itself, the rocks, also feels somewhat pasted in. And here's Hokusai's version of the same subject, which although the text is not extensive, it does give a hint of the animals in the animal kingdom, what the animals are about. It is brief. It says, tigers fear bears, leopards fear tigers. Very simple. But there is a sense of competition, a law of the jungle, and nature read in tooth and claw. There is also a sense of the background being not emblematic, but a habitat. This tiger is moving through the background. These animals are interacting. This is a complete reinvention, in a sense, of a known subject. It is rather different from the staid encyclopedias conceived as aids to understanding the Confucian classics. So, what was the social environment for books, and what might have been, if the book had been published, what might have been the social environment for Hokusai's encyclopedia? Where could you find books and prints during the Edo period? Well, as you see on the left, there were itinerant vendors and also traveling lending libraries. But publishers, as you see on the right, also had established locations where their own commissioned prints and books were sold, along with those of affiliated publishers. This is a view of a large branch of the publisher Tsuruya, located on the main road into the city of Edo. At the top right, you see stacks and stacks of prints. Each one of those stacks is a different design, which gives you, I think, a sense of the scale of print production in the Edo period. Is very difficult now with the rarity of some subjects and the rarity of many prints to get a sense of the scale, the enormity of print production, and all of it is woodblock printing. All of it is woodblock printing. Books, prints, announcements, advertisements, everything is being printed by woodblock. And it is said that if you were a printer with just a printer's pad, that was enough for you to make a living. Not a great living, but a living anywhere in Japan. So that's at the top right is these stacks and stacks of prints. And then moving over to the left, we have two girls who are browsing volumes of some illustrated novel of some kind. At the top left here are the cashiers, each one of whom has his own abacus, showing that business is good. At the far left are two delivery men one of whom is returning after having made a delivery, and another one on his way out, so that you can see, again, business is good. But what is remarkable, I think, about this illustration is the presence of this woman here, who is a high-ranking lady from a daimyo's household. This is a samurai garb here. These are her attendants carrying her palanquin. Samurai were the only people who were allowed to travel by this mode of transportation, and 2 attendants carrying her goods. Just to show that we often think of prints and popular novels as intended for commoners and so on, as though they would not have been known, or that the upper classes would not have been exposed to them or known to them, but that is absolutely not the case. And finally here, 2 customers who are examining examples of actor prints, and this attendant in the bookshop is showing them a print of courtesans. So just to show you the variety of people who were exposed to prints. However, that is prints and popular culture. I don't know exactly, but I have a feeling, my impression is that proper books, textbooks, books of learning, Confucian classics, all of that kind of book was sold under very different circumstances. A much more private setting. Here we have a samurai who is in discussion with the samurai with his attendants here, in discussion with the owner of a bookshop, in this case, one of Hokusai's publishers. It happens to be Toshusai, over a book. But the books are placed in cupboards. There are a few possibly on display on a shelf behind the publisher there, but for the most part, they're not exposed to the public in the way the prints and popular books are. They're indicated with titles, with these wooden placards. It's a very different kind of experience. It's a much closer to the experience of reading. And how did people learn to read during the Edo period? This is 2 examples of what are probably samurai ranking households, but they're very similar. Boys and girls seem to have been educated separately, but these are very similar kinds of settings where there is a teacher and a group of students, each reading, and possibly the students are of different ages, so that there's a kind of one-room schoolhouse kind of atmosphere in certain cases. But the books, in this case, are placed on an alcove in the background as items to be of respect. So there's a great respect for books in this culture. And on the right, each one of these little boys has, it's difficult to know how old they are, but they probably are on the young side, possibly 7, 8, 9, but they're already reading the Confucian classics, as you can see in the background, where in the bookcase there is the classic of history and a classic volume of selected ancient Chinese poetry, which may have, in China at this time, started to go out of fashion, but was still important in Japan. And it is important to remember that in Japan at this time, Japan considers itself the storehouse, the safeguard of ancient Chinese culture. And the Confucian classics, as I mentioned, are the basis of all education. There was also study at home. This is 2 halves of an illustration, which is actually one long vertical illustration. So that means that father and son are on the upper level of the house and the mother and daughter on the lower level of the house. But be that as it may, this is a very wealthy house in any case, possibly samurai, but also possibly a merchant family, because merchants have access to the highest levels of education. So here we see learning in the home as well. And in this case, an example of how children learned to write. The teacher is here with a private tutorial with an older student, while younger students, the boys are here and the girls are here, but they're there. And I'm sorry, this is jumping around. You'll see if you look closely that the boys and girls are practicing calligraphy, but that the pieces of paper that they're working with here looks like a mess. But what's actually happened is that they're writing over and over and over again the same characters over the same pieces of paper. So that's what that represents. It just shows so the diligence of these students. And this may be a regional house, a regional school, we don't know. But again, in the background, in the alcove at the upper right, you see the 5 classics. So again, Chinese culture. And the notation on the far right, which says learning to write, learning calligraphy. But what it says is that people from all ranks of society become busy with responsibilities and find little time for study. So the idea is, the recommendation is to become an upstanding person. It is best to start young and study hard with a good teacher, which is fine advice. But only a privileged few could attain that ideal. What about the other 99%? Starting around the 1780s, a whole division of the publishing industry became devoted to publishing the annotated classics aimed at those who did not necessarily have access to a good teacher, but who aimed at self-improvement, people in farming villages and in the provinces and so on. The paragon of this movement was the book that you see here on the left, the first in a series called Your Other Classics Tutor. The book on the right is an annotated edition of a famous anthology of Chinese Tang poetry, which follows a similar format. And I'm going to risk jumping forward with the slide to show you that this is open to the famous first page of the Confucian Analects, where the teacher, which is assumed to be Confucius, says to study and at times and periodically to put into practice what one has studied. Is that not a pleasure? Those are the famous first words, encouraging respect for learning. The original text appears across the top. And then in the large characters is the original text with the indicating the, because this is Chinese and Chinese grammar is different from Japanese, there are notes indicating the order in which you should read them if it were Japanese. If that weren't complicated enough, you have to pronounce it in the Chinese form. And then to the left of that is the annotation of what this phrase means. Also important that it indicates that when we think of Confucianism, usually we think of just, it's sort of a vague mess. Confucian classics, not a big mess, but sort of an undifferentiated whole, the Confucian classics. But this is not just the Confucian, this is specifically the Confucian classics as understood by the Chinese scholar Zhu Shi. I'm not sure, my pronunciation of the name is probably not very good, but that is what we call Neo-Confucianism. That's what it all refers to. It is Song Dynasty Confucianism, which is its own breed of Confucianism. That's what is being taught in China, and that's what's being studied in Japan at this time. So the book on the right is, as you can see, the similar format of the selected Tang poetry, published by Suzambo, one of Hokusai's later publishers. So this is the kind of book that makes learning available. Your Other Classics Tutor became a whole series into the early 19th century and then reprinted multiple times throughout the 19th century and into the Meiji era. So Hokusai is working in this environment where learning is becoming available to a much larger, sort of horizons for learning are expanding. And he is participating in this world, not only, as I mentioned, in drawing manuals, such as the Hokusai's sketches, which were available widely and became vastly popular, or in a book such as this, the painting album of the three styles, in which he demonstrates three different styles: formal, semi-cursive, and cursive brush styles of painting. And we know that this book was widely available. It's been documented that a wealthy farmer in north central Japan, Obusei, which I mentioned where Hokusai visited, used this book to teach himself how to paint. And he focused particularly on the figure subjects in this book, but it made its way all across Japan. So Hokusai is participating in this culture of expanding learning, not only through his drawing manuals, but also through books that are intended for study purposes. And this is a famous one, Model Correspondence Illustrated. Model Correspondence is the anthology. And here you see at the top is the text, the Japanese pronunciation, and then an illustration. Now, I'll just tell you a little bit about what this letter across the top is about. This collection of model correspondence may have been compiled around 1400 or so, or the early 1300s. It's not known for sure. The correspondence it contains is earlier than that. So it is not even current language, even in the Edo period. This is ancient language, but it is meant to build vocabulary and to introduce people at the very highest level how they should correspond with one another. This anthology is organized seasonally from the first month all the way through the last month. So this letter that we see here is a response to an invitation to a flower viewing party in the second month. So that would be plum blossoms. But the invitation is not just to view the flowers, but also to participate in poetry composition. And this response names all of the different kinds of poetry that were practiced in Japan all throughout these centuries from the 1400s onwards, from traditional Japanese styles to Chinese styles and so on, and variations on those styles. And the author of this letter, in exaggeratedly humble prose, sort of self-deprecating prose, says, I have some skill in some of these kinds of poetry, but not in others. I don't know if I'm really the right person to participate, but I look forward to participating, and so on. All of that kind of language. The illustration that accompanies this is for the 4 estates. It has no correlation to the content of the letters. We see here a samurai, a representative of the farming community, someone who may be building a shrine, industry, construction, or an artisan of some kind, and on the far left, someone who appears to be selling, may have baskets of fresh fish. So in the Edo period, the 4 estates were often understood as a hierarchy, with the samurai at the top and the merchants at the bottom. But that is not the only way that the 4 estates were understood. The 4 estates could also be understood as 4 components of a society, not samurai, farmer, artisan, and merchant, but government, agriculture, industry, and commerce. That's a very different way of understanding the 4 estates. And that seems to be in this lateral presentation, how Hokusai is presenting that understanding of society. Not only that, usually when this conception has been illustrated, it is very often as a kind of a joke at the end with a courtesan representing the merchants. That's not the case here. It is a true someone representing someone who is vending things for a living. Also, the farmer as a woman, and if I can use this term, as an earth mother type, because she appears very often in other works by Hokusai, his prints and his illustrations. She occurs in Hokusai manga and also in sketches for the 100 Poets series in the 1830s. She's always bringing lunch. She's got some maybe hot tea in that kettle, but she is ready to go to work alongside the men if necessary. And this is unusual because usually what women's role in agriculture was to plant the seedlings, but not here. So this is a very different kind of conception and seems to be part of a broadening of understanding of a more kind of egalitarian approach to society, which is which one gets from all of those books that sort of independent study, self-study, self-development of the Confucian classics that were becoming available. So now this is my last slide. We have seen a sort of a changing sense of aspirations, a broadening interest in learning, an expanding range of availability for knowledge and what might be considered knowledge in the Edo period. So this sort of shift might account for the inclusion of so many stories of adventure and heroic deeds in Hokusai's illustrations for the Great Picture Book, particularly in the China section. They were not only of interest to Hokusai, but also to the publisher and his potential readers. The stories seem to be untied now from moral instruction or exhortations to virtue. They suggest learning to be an adventure with new horizons opening all the time, as symbolized by this story of a Taoist priest who formed a ladder of clouds to reach the moon and bring it back to Earth for ordinary mortals to study and enjoy, much as Hokusai did with his skill in the art of painting. It is a great picture book of everything, at least according to Hokusai. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Alfred. That was absolutely splendid. I can tell you that from my window here in the cathedral close, we have a waxing gibbous moon tonight rising up above the cathedral and leading us to the next full moon on the 19th. And I'll think about that full moon and this last wonderful image that you've presented to us and you started your talk with as well. I think everybody will join me in saying a huge thank you for what a wide-ranging lecture introducing this really exceptional material that you've now got on display at the British Museum. And I believe I'm right in saying that the exhibition is on until the 30th of January next year, if that's correct. So if you possibly can, do get along and see it. I would definitely recommend it. Now, you've raised a number of really interesting questions, and I'm going to come to the Q&A in just a moment. And I would encourage our audience, if you do have questions for Alfred, we have a few minutes, do pop your questions in the Q&A box, and I know we'll try and come to them. So many things that I would like to ask, but one thing we're particularly struck by the educational aspect of what you've been talking about, and the role that these early encyclopedias and these picture books, is the whole topic, I suppose, the great picture book of everything, that notion of encyclopedic knowledge, and that every person can access that information. I think obviously very profound ideas, and really interesting the way that you're tying that up with this perhaps perception of a more egalitarian approach to society towards the end of your talk. But I wanted to ask you, because obviously this is a huge economic thing driving all of this as well, and you beautifully encapsulated all of that. To what extent do you think Hokusai himself was leading this move towards greater access to education? And to what extent do you think he was responding to the economic demands of his publishers who were saying, we need more of this kind of stuff?
Yes, I think that's very good. It's, of course, that is one of those questions that is impossible to answer. But because the publisher of this, So one thing I did, there is so much to mention about these drawings, really. And I would like to be sure to mention that some of the the groundwork for all of our understanding of it is in Tim Clark's book, which is conveniently called Hokusai, the Great Picture Book of Everything. So it's very easy to remember. And it is not a catalog of the exhibition, but it is the basis for the exhibition. That it is known that Hokusai, 2 letters are recorded where to Hokusai's publisher Suzambo, where he acknowledges receipt of payment for several drawings for a book titled The Great Picture Book of Everything. So it is very clear to tie Hokusai to this project. But Suzambo was the publisher, as I mentioned, of that educational text of the Tang poetry, and had a long history of being associated with educational texts and Confucian texts in particular from the 18th century onward, but was also one of Hokusai, probably Hokusai's main publisher in the 1830s, published a lot of his books of warrior prints, of warrior subjects and so on. And so the involvement of the publisher is probably very important in this whole project. And the idea that these unusual narrative subjects, which are not found in earlier encyclopedias, that they form such an important component of this group of drawings. And I should also mention that the drawings relate to another group of drawings in the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, which cover Japanese subjects and some of the animal subjects that are not found in the British Museum's drawings. However, the Japanese subjects in that case, they are generic in the manner of traditional encyclopedias, examples of occupations and so on. There is nothing like this narrative component. So it seems to be possibly emerging from the 1830s and perhaps from the publisher's relationship with Hokusai, the success of Hokusai's books with narrative themes in the 1830s, that it then becomes incorporated and somehow and expands the range of what encyclopedia might have been. So to what extent Hokusai is thrilled to draw anything, and so he was thrilled to draw anything sort of put before him in a sense. So, but there is something of the nature of these illustrations that they do move away from the sort of moralizing component that expand the boundaries of what an encyclopedia might be, that may have appealed to him. Whether he may have initiated that approach or not is difficult to say, but he kept drawing and drawing and drawing in this line. So he certainly sort of was, all we can say is that he was thrilled with the approach, I would say.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. So I'm going to turn to the questions in the Q&A now. And we have one from Gianfranco Chico asking, what have you learned from these new works from Hokusai that challenges or completes what was known about him until now?
The idea that Hokusai, first of all, that Hokusai had moved away from publishing in his last decade is one important thing. That he still has his hand in the publishing world, and that he's still involved in thinking about what a market and what publishing is about, and new audiences for his work, not only through painting but also through publishing. So that is one thing. Also, that he wasn't afraid of challenging his block cutters. That these are that in a recent discussion with Tim Clark, which some of you may have seen recorded, Asano Shugo notes a difference between there are a group of drawings preserved in the National Museum of Asian Art, which used to be called the Freer-Sackler in Washington, D.C., which relate to the subject of the 100 poets. And he sees a slight difference in some drawings from another, that some drawings may seem simpler and smoother, that those may have been done by Hokusai's daughter Oi, but that the more difficult ones may have been done by Hokusai. Smaller brush marks, more difficult. Hokusai did not cater to his block cutters. He pursued his own vision. And I think this is something that we see also from these drawings.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Stephanie Sanchi, our dear friend, has a question for you, Alfred. She says you illustrated how the ink washes on the drawing could be replicated with printing techniques like bokashi or roughening of the printing blocks. As the washes are quite close to the fine lines, do you think this would have necessitated at least 2 printing blocks?
Yes, I'll just go back to one of the illustrations that I showed. I may have gone over that too quickly. I think you can see that the lion here, there's a white line outlining the chin, which separates the ink wash area from the brush mark. So it's a kind of adaptation to the medium of the woodblock. But it means that the drawing could have been printed from a single block.
Well, that's great, thank you. And maybe following on from that, Philip Eberel asks, can it be deduced how much definition was lost between Hokusai's drawings to the prints?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And what we have, the examples for comparing that are the drawings, I think, in the National Museum of Asian Art in Washington, where we do have a few examples from that series that were published, and then a few examples, and then many, many more examples that were not published. And the British Museum has 4 of those examples also. But that does give a sense of the sort of, that we are very fortunate that the British Museums, that these wonderful, wonderful drawings have survived. Just the fantastic delicacy of the brush marks is just extraordinary. So these are a real, real treasure. That's a great question.
So we have just to finish off, we've got a double question from Peter Carver, who asks, what would the preparation time for publishing one of these books have been? And would there have been a factory of wood block cutters?
Right. Well, Hokusai was very particular, and I don't think he would have stood for a factory. He named the block cutters that he wanted. And that is particularly true for the 100 Views of Mount Fuji, one of the most beautiful books that was ever printed. And he specified who he wanted as his publisher. And that, in a very rare case, the block cutter is named in the colophon of that book, and the son of that, and so on. So he stuck with the best that he could find. So I don't think that he would have stood for a factory, and that book was published. You know, a great picture book of everything with 103 drawings sounds like a lot, but when we think of 100 Views of Mount Fuji, it was done. And we don't know the time period over which that would have been done, but I think it would have required, if not a factory, it probably might have been handled within a studio of a very experienced. And you have to know that printers and block cutters both went through a 10-year apprenticeship, at least, if they wanted to be any good. So those are the people who Hokusai worked with, and he knew who was good because he had done some of it himself, and he wanted the best. That doesn't answer your question exactly, but I think it approaches the question. We don't know exactly how long. Sort of the question involves also, because this project seems to have gone on for 20 years. So that's unusual in first of all, that Hokusai kept drawing and drawing and drawing. And what was he attempting really in drawing everything? It's possibly not just what you could see, but it's just the world as he saw it, which is a little different and a little bit more. And that's sort of what gives the drawings this energy, that he's reimagining stories that were familiar and other stories that were not familiar and giving them new life. So how this project, the drawings themselves are over a 20-year period and it still wasn't finished. So it's difficult to know how long it would have taken really. But I think he would have wanted, he knew who, if it was going to be done, it would have been done right.
Alfred, that's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm afraid we are drawing to the end of our time now. And although I know we've got further questions in the Q&A, perhaps we can find another occasion to address those. I just want to echo, I see we've had friends from around the world with us this evening, not only from here in Norwich, but we've had colleagues in Venice, in Prague, in Ottawa, in Dresden, and in Atlanta, Georgia. So amazing. So the draw of Hokusai is unquestionably global. I know that everybody will echo Ginny Levitt's comment, wish you could hear us clapping. How very wonderful. So Alfred, thank you so much for an illuminating talk. And as I would say to everybody, please do get to see the exhibition if you possibly can. And I think they're a really good on, as well as Tim Clark's wonderful book of the same title, of course, there's great online materials on some of this at the British Museum as well. So do check out all of that. So that is the last of our Third Thursday events for this extraordinary year of 2021. Just before we sign off, I'd just like to say that we will be back in January for our new series of 2022 lectures. As announced in our e-bulletin, we're going to keep these talks online for the most part, and given what's happening here in the UK, that does seem like the sensible option just for the time being, but we're very much hoping that we will be able to supplement that with some in-person activities as well, so that we get to see everybody too. On behalf of everybody here at the Sainsbury Institute for the Study of Japanese Arts and Cultures, we'd like to wish you all a very Merry Christmas, or at least as merry a Christmas as we're able to manage this year, and look forward to what we all hope will be a brighter new year. And I know you will all want to join me in thanking Dr. Alfred Haft once again for that wonderful lecture, and we look forward to seeing all of you again in the new year. Stay safe. Keep wearing your masks, and we will get through what is promising to be a challenging period. Merry Christmas to you all, and thank you very much, and good evening.
Thank you all.
Good night.